Imagine walking through a busy airport, boarding pass in hand, with the usual hum of travelers and flight announcements echoing overhead. You glance up at the screen and spot a familiar airline logo that you've seen your entire life. It's a name you trust, one that's always been there, quietly getting people where they need to go. But now picture this. By tomorrow, that airline no longer exists. Flights will get cancelled with no warning, planes grounded, and employees suddenly without a job. An entire company that once dominated the skies simply vanished without a trace. As unreal as it sounds, this isn't a hypothetical. It actually happened, and not to some budget carrier or unknown regional airline. This was one of Australia's biggest and most trusted names in aviation, built over decades with a loyal customer base and a major share of the domestic travel market. It was seen by many as a national institution, but despite that, it all came crashing down fast. So, how does that happen? How does a company with 66 years of history go from household name to total collapse? Buckle up, this is the unbelievable rise and shocking fall of Ansett Australia. To understand how it all fell apart, we have to go back to where it began. The story traces all the way to 1935, when a man named Reginald Ansett decided to take on the transport industry. A pilot with sharp instincts for business, he started with just one plane and a single route between Hamilton and Melbourne. Reg had seen an opportunity that others had missed. At the time, train fares were tightly controlled by the government, but airfares weren't, which meant he could set his own prices, offer faster service, and build a loyal customer base in a space with little competition. It was a simple idea, but one that gave him an edge, and he ran with it. That small operation quickly gained momentum, and Reg didn't hesitate to expand. As more routes opened and demand for air travel grew, so did his ambitions. By the 1950s, the Ansett name was becoming well known across Australia, and in 1957, Reg took a major leap by acquiring Australian National Airways, the largest domestic competitor at the time. It was a game-changing move that elevated Ansett from a regional airline into a national powerhouse. At that point, it had become a fixture of Australian life, a brand people recognised and trusted. But Reg's vision didn't end with aviation. As the airline grew, he began branching out into other industries, adding hotels, car rental services, freight operations, and even television to the Ansett portfolio. The brand quickly became one of the most recognisable in the country, a symbol of modern Australian enterprise. For decades, Ansett thrived under a system that, by today's standards, sounds pretty strange. It was called the Two-Airline policy. Essentially, the government decided that only two airlines would dominate the domestic market, Ansett and Trans-Australia Airlines, or TAA. The two operated almost in sync. It was a manufactured form of competition designed to keep fares steady and airlines stable. This policy created a comfortable, predictable environment for Ansett. Profits were steady, risks were low, and expansion was controlled. But that safety came at a cost. Over time, the company became bloated, slow to innovate, and too reliant on the government's protective bubble. Eventually, Reg Ansett formally stepped away from Ansett Australia in the late 70s, marking a turning point for the company. The airline, once driven by a clear and focused vision, now found itself under the control of corporate boards and executive teams who lacked both Reg's instincts and his deep connection to aviation. Over the next decade, ownership passed between powerful players, including logistics firms and media companies. By the early 1990s, Ansett was jointly owned by TNT, a transport company, and Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. The partnership looked strategic on paper, but in practice, it was anything but. One side focused on cost-cutting and logistics, while the other seemed more interested in influence and image. Neither had a clear plan for how to move the airline forward in a rapidly changing market. Meanwhile, the industry was shifting. Qantas was preparing for privatization, international routes were opening up, and budget airlines were starting to emerge with leaner business models and sharper pricing. While competitors adapted to the new reality, Ansett remained stuck in its old ways, slow to innovate, burdened by high operating costs, and increasingly out of touch with the needs of modern travelers. By the 90s, the cozy little world of Australian aviation was about to be turned upside down. The government finally scrapped the long-standing two-airline policy, and just like that, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, anyone with ambition and a business plan could start an airline. Fares were no longer fixed, routes weren't protected, and the skies became a free-for-all. Qantas moved quickly, modernizing its operations and preparing to take on the global stage. Meanwhile, Ansett was still acting like it had all the time in the world. Instead of shifting into high gear, the airline kept dragging its feet. Its fleet was full of aging, outdated airframes like the Boeing 727. While competitors invested in newer, quieter, more efficient planes, Ansett stuck with what it knew. Unfortunately, what it knew was becoming outdated fast. Behind the scenes, things weren't looking much better. The company had grown bloated, with too many departments stepping on each other's toes and no clear strategy to streamline anything. Decisions took forever, investments kept getting kicked down the road, and passengers started noticing the slip in service. While the Ansett brand still carried weight, reputation alone wasn't going to keep it in the air. Competitors were catching up, and some were already passing it by. In 1996, Air New Zealand bought half of Ansett, and by 2000, they went all in and took over the rest. But things unraveled almost immediately. Air New Zealand quickly realized they'd bought into more trouble than they expected. Ansett's maintenance program was severely underfunded. In fact, it got so bad that in 2001, Australia's Civil Aviation Safety Authority grounded several Ansett aircraft over safety concerns. That alone shook public confidence. But there was more. Ansett was bleeding cash. Its cost structure was unsustainable, its market share was slipping, and newer airlines like Virgin Blue were gaining popularity with budget-conscious travelers. Air New Zealand, already stretched thin financially, was suddenly trying to fix a sinking ship in a storm. And just when it couldn't get any worse, the world changed overnight. When the September 11th attacks happened, global aviation took a massive hit. Passenger demand collapsed, insurance costs soared, and investor confidence dried up almost instantly. Every airline felt the pressure, but for Ansett, who's already on life support, this was the final blow. Just 3 days after the September 11th attacks, on September 14th, 2001, Ansett was placed into voluntary administration. Flights were suspended, aircraft were grounded, and thousands of employees were suddenly left in limbo. More than 16,000 staff were affected, and passengers across the country faced cancelled bookings and disrupted travel. Airports turned into scenes of confusion and heartbreak. What had been one of Australia's proudest companies simply ceased to operate. In the months that followed, efforts were made to keep a portion of the airline running. Administrators tried launching a slimmed-down version of Ansett, operating select routes with fewer planes, but it wasn't enough. The financial hole was too deep, and confidence in the brand had evaporated. By March 2002, Ansett was completely shut down. Its assets were sold off, planes were auctioned, and just like that, a brand that had existed for nearly 70 years was gone. The ripple effects spread far beyond the airline itself. Tourism took a hit. Regional communities lost key airlinks. And for many, the collapse marked a turning point in how Australians viewed corporate leadership and government oversight in critical industries. So, what took Ansett down? A combination of outdated practices, poor management, underinvestment in maintenance, lack of innovation, and constant ownership changes meant the airline was never really future-proofed. Add in increased competition, changing customer expectations, deregulation, and global shocks like 9/11, and the pressure became too much. Ansett's leadership couldn't navigate the storm, and the business collapsed under its own weight. No brand is too big to fail. No legacy is untouchable. Ansett proves that, and in a fast-moving world, companies that get too comfortable often get left behind. Yet for all the mistakes and missed chances, Ansett still holds a place in the hearts of many Australians. Whether it was your first flight, a family holiday, or the gold-winged pin you kept from the flight attendant, the memories remain. Let us know in the comments section below. Have you ever flown with Ansett? What do you remember most? Hit like if this story surprised you, and subscribe for more deep dives into the big rises and even bigger falls in business and history. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.